The galaxy had long been stagnant. For millennia, countless species, each with their own histories, cultures, and vast empires, had reached a plateau in their development. Technological innovation had come to a grinding halt. Once thriving civilizations now focused only on maintaining the status quo, unwilling to take the risks needed to push their boundaries further. Some species believed that they had achieved perfection and were content to bask in their own stagnation, while others saw change as a dangerous threat that could destabilize everything they had built. In a universe filled with lifeless stars and dull, gray cities, nothing moved forward except for humanity. Humans were different. They were creatures of possibility, of chaos and creation, capable of imagining and inventing things that no other species had even dared to consider. Where other species rested on their laurels, humanity rose from its humble origins on a single planet to become a force that would forever change the fabric of the galaxy. It was this innate drive to create, to solve problems, to reach beyond the known and into the unknown, that set them apart. While other species had stagnated in their complacency, humanity had been quietly amassing the tools and knowledge that would spark a revolution. And in the quiet recesses of their minds, humanity's greatest minds knew one thing: the galaxy was in desperate need of change, and humanity was the only species capable of bringing it. The birth of the revolution came in a place as unlikely as any, a hidden research facility on a nameless moon orbiting a dead planet. It was a place where the brightest minds of humanity had gathered, not by command, but by instinct. They were scientists, engineers, artists, philosophers, people who had been driven by that innate desire to do more, to think deeper, to break the chains of stagnation. And it was in this remote facility, tucked away from the prying eyes of the galaxy's rulers, that humanity discovered the key to reigniting the fire of invention. They had uncovered a strange, ancient alien artifact, buried beneath layers of dust and forgotten history. It wasn't a weapon, nor a tool, nor even a vessel. It was a key to a far greater understanding, a blueprint for limitless possibility. For years, the humans studied the artifact. Its origins were unclear. Perhaps it had come from a civilization long since extinct, or maybe it had been left behind by a species who had simply moved on. Regardless of its source, it held something that none of the other species in the galaxy had ever conceived of: the concept of true innovation. It was a strange device, more like a living organism than a machine, capable of creating new ideas and technology on its own, taking the raw materials of the universe and shaping them into something entirely new. It was the spark that humanity needed to reignite the creative fires that had long been dormant in the galaxy. At first, the other species didn't notice. Humanity's technological advancements were subtle, almost imperceptible, nothing that would have drawn the attention of the galaxy's elites. But in the shadows, humanity's thinkers and creators were beginning to experiment. They learned to harness the alien artifact's power to generate new technologies, machines, medicines, and materials that were once thought impossible. It wasn't just a matter of building better weapons or more efficient ships. Humanity's creations were transformative, pushing the boundaries of physics, biology, and even time itself. Soon, it became clear that humanity had unlocked a secret that no one else had even known existed. They had the ability to invent, not just improve, but to create from scratch. As humanity's innovations began to take shape, they started to look outward, to the rest of the galaxy. The stagnation of the other species was evident to them now. They saw how the once great empires had fallen into decay, how entire civilizations had become bloated with bureaucracy and corruption. The ruling species of the galaxy were blind to the fact that their very existence depended on the flow of new ideas, new technologies, new ways of thinking. They had stopped evolving, stopped innovating. And that was where humanity stepped in. The first signs of revolution were small. A new type of propulsion system, far more efficient than anything that had come before. A new energy source that could power entire colonies without reliance on fuel or external resources. A breakthrough in medical science that allowed humans to cure diseases that had once been deemed incurable. These were not the kinds of inventions that would immediately bring about a revolution. They were simply tools, weapons in a much larger war. The humans knew that they would need more than just technology to win the hearts and minds of the galaxy's inhabitants. They would need something far more potent, the idea that change, true change, was possible. And so, the humans began to spread their influence. They didn't march in with armies, nor did they send fleets to burn down the capitals of the galaxy's stagnant empires. No, their method was far subtler. They infiltrated. They infiltrated the universities, the research centers, the think tanks of the other species. Slowly, they began to teach them what they had learned. At first, their ideas were dismissed, laughed at, ridiculed. How could a species like humanity, so young and inexperienced compared to the ancient civilizations of the galaxy, possibly have anything of value to offer? But as the humans demonstrated their creations, their ingenuity, their boundless curiosity, even the most stubborn minds began to crack. It started with the scholars. They were the first to recognize the potential of humanity's inventions, the first to realize that the galaxy's stagnation wasn't inevitable. They understood that the stagnation was a product of complacency, of the unwillingness to risk and change. The humans, with their inventions and ideas, represented the future, a future that the other species had long since abandoned. The scholars, many of them in positions of power in their respective governments, began to push for change, to challenge the entrenched powers that held the galaxy in a vice of control. Slowly, they started to gather followers. What began as small intellectual debates in the halls of academia became rallies and movements across entire planets. It wasn't long before those rallies spread beyond the walls of universities and research labs. The general populace, tired of the stagnation that had plagued their lives for centuries, began to demand change as well. Humanity's revolution was now a movement, one that transcended species and borders. The ruling empires were quick to respond. They had ruled the galaxy for so long that they had become arrogant, blind to the fact that their authority was eroding. They didn't understand the power of innovation, the power of fresh ideas. They saw the humans as nothing more than a nuisance, a fringe group of rebels who threatened the delicate balance they had carefully maintained. They clamped down, increasing their control over communication, tightening their grip on the economy, and cracking down on dissent. But they were too late. The revolution had already begun. The humans weren't interested in toppling the empires through brute force. Instead, they spread ideas of freedom, creativity, and progress. They built underground networks, connecting the oppressed people of the galaxy, giving them access to humanity's innovations. They taught them how to break free from the chains of stagnation. The human revolution was one of ideas, not of violence, though violence would come in time. The galaxy's elite would not go quietly into the night. Soon, entire planets began to turn away from the old order. Workers, engineers, doctors, and scientists, people from all walks of life, began to rise up. They demanded the freedom to invent, to create, to think. They no longer wanted to live in the shadow of a dying empire. They wanted to build, to grow, to imagine a future that was far brighter than the one they had inherited. And with humanity's technology in hand, they were capable of making that future a reality. The old empires responded with fury, deploying their fleets and armies to crush the uprising. But the revolutionaries were armed with far more than just weapons. They were armed with the power of creation itself. Humanity's innovations, the propulsion systems, the energy sources, the medical breakthroughs allowed them to fight in ways that the old empires had never even dreamed of. The empire's ships were faster, more agile, and better armed. Their cities were more secure, their leaders more entrenched. But they were powerless against an enemy that could create new things out of thin air, that could adapt faster than any of them had ever imagined. The revolution spread like wildfire, and soon the galaxy was plunged into chaos. It wasn't just a rebellion, it was a revolution of ideas, of possibilities, of hope. The ruling empires could not contain it. As their fleets and armies crumbled, they turned to their last line of defense, the ultimate weapon, the one thing that had held the galaxy together for so long: control over the flow of information. The humans, with their boundless creativity, responded in kind. They hacked, they innovated, they pushed the limits of what was possible. Within months, entire planetary systems had fallen under the sway of the revolution. The idea of stagnation of a galaxy bound by old, outdated laws and traditions was shattered, replaced by the idea that anything was possible. It was no longer about controlling resources or territory. It was about controlling ideas, and humanity had won that war before the other species had even realized it had started. In the final stages of the revolution, the leaders of the old empires, desperate to hold onto their power, made their last stand. But it was futile. The people of the galaxy had seen the truth. They had seen what humanity could create, what it could invent. The future belonged to those who were willing to risk everything to build a better world. And humanity, with all its flaws and imperfections, was the only species in the galaxy that had the courage to do it. The galaxy, once stagnant and frozen, was now a place of constant change. Humanity had triggered a revolution that would never end. The future was no longer something that was inherited. It was something that could be built, piece by piece, by anyone brave enough to imagine it. And with humanity leading the charge, the galaxy would never again be the same. The revolution had reached its tipping point. What began as a small flicker of invention and imagination had grown into an unstoppable tide, sweeping across the galaxy and dismantling the age-old systems that had held sway for millennia. Humanity's ideas had taken root, and they had ignited a fire within the galaxy's many oppressed species. Where once there had been complacency, there was now a rising chorus of hope, and the forces of stagnation had no answers. The tide was irreversible. With each passing day, more planets fell under the sway of the revolution. The alien empires, once formidable, had quickly realized that they were losing the war not because their fleets were weaker, nor because their armies were outnumbered, but because they could not stop the spread of creativity, of fresh ideas. The human drive to invent, to explore, to build, and to break things down in order to make something new was a power they had never encountered before. Humanity wasn't just waging war with weapons, it was waging war with thought itself, and thought was the ultimate weapon. The first breakthrough that truly shifted the course of the revolution had been humanity's ability to create hyper-efficient energy systems. They had cracked the code for clean, nearly limitless power, and within months, entire cities on formerly resource-poor planets had been transformed. What once had taken vast amounts of fuel and labor now took little more than a flicker of energy from human-designed reactors. It wasn't just a matter of new energy, it was the promise of freedom from dependence, from the iron grip of the old empires who had controlled everything through scarcity. This single breakthrough gave the revolutionaries a tremendous advantage. But that was only the beginning. Humanity's scientists and engineers had created communication systems that were near unbreakable, methods of data transmission that could not be intercepted by the galactic authorities. The sheer scale of the revolution was no longer confined to the hidden corners of the galaxy. It had become a network, an underground grid connecting rebels, creators, and thinkers across planets and star systems. Once, the forces of stagnation had relied on their ability to control information, to restrict access to the very ideas that fueled the revolution. Now, the revolution itself had become an idea that could not be contained. It wasn't just about technology anymore. The cultural shift was just as profound. It became clear to every corner of the galaxy that there was something fundamentally different about humanity. While other species had long been content to rely on their centuries-old traditions, human minds were always looking forward. Where other species had become fearful of failure, humanity embraced it as part of the creative process. The galaxy's greatest thinkers, many of them once content with safe and predictable lives, began to see the potential of this new order, of this new world being built. They saw that the true strength of humanity was not in its machines, but in its mindset, its refusal to stop asking questions, its ability to see possibilities where others saw only walls. The empires did not go quietly, though. The galaxy's ruling classes had clung to power for far too long, and they were not about to lose everything without a fight. Despite all their technological and military might, they could not stem the tide of change. In their desperation, they tried to consolidate power in new ways, to find new weapons, anything to hold onto control. But every attempt at suppression only fueled the revolution further. The more they tried to stifle humanity's ideas, the more humanity responded with new, unexpected answers. It wasn't until the Human Alliance fleet, an amalgamation of former rebel fleets, humanitarian organizations, and newly formed coalitions of alien species who had long suffered under the rule of the old empires assembled in the Aritian Nebula, that the ruling forces finally realized just how deeply humanity had infected the galaxy's systems. The fleet, thousands of ships strong, was proof that no empire could stand against a united front of innovation, cooperation, and sheer determination. The nebula became the stage for one of the most significant battles in galactic history, a final showdown between those who sought to preserve stagnation and those who sought to tear down the walls. The human-led fleet, with their advanced propulsion and energy technologies, easily outpaced the older ships of the empires, which still relied on outdated systems. The battle raged for days, the vast space around the nebula alive with the flashes of energy blasts and the deafening silence of the void. For the first time in centuries, the mighty fleets of the galactic rulers were on the defensive. It was clear that the future no longer belonged to them. But the real victory, the one that would seal humanity's place as the driving force in the galaxy, came not from the sheer size of the fleet, nor from the weapons at their disposal. It came from the ideas that humanity carried with them. The battle at the Aritian Nebula was not won by force alone, it was won by the way humanity had altered the very foundations of warfare. While the empires still relied on old strategies holding ground and forcing control, crushing uprisings, humanity had shown the galaxy something different. They fought with their minds. They fought by changing the way battles were waged. The most devastating weapon humanity had was the ability to adapt, to shift strategies on the fly, to see the patterns that others missed. Every tactic the old empires had relied on was suddenly irrelevant. And in that realization, they saw their inevitable defeat. But even then, there were still those within the old empires who refused to concede. Desperation drove them to seek the final, most dangerous option, a weapon so terrible that it could, in one stroke, erase the fruits of the revolution. The ancient archives of the galaxy spoke of such a weapon, an artifact created long ago by an extinct race of beings who had sought to control the flow of time itself. A weapon so potent that it could destroy entire fleets in seconds, and more terrifyingly revert entire planets back to a pre-industrial state. If they could wield it, the revolution could be wiped from existence before it even had the chance to spread. The final act of the war would be erase humanity and the revolutionaries versus the remnants of the empire to find this weapon and use it before the other could. A covert team of humans, led by the brilliant tactician and inventor Marcus Sloan, was dispatched to locate and disable this weapon. Using every bit of their creativity, they infiltrated one of the galaxy's most secure, remote outposts, a place where the weapon had been hidden for centuries. Their goal was clear: either destroy the weapon before it could be activated or use their own technology to turn it against those who sought to wield it. In the heart of this ancient facility, Sloan and his team uncovered the weapon, an enormous, crystalline construct, shimmering with dark energy, built by a forgotten species. It pulsed with a malevolent power that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality around it. If it were activated, time itself could bend to the will of whoever held it. But Sloan knew there was no going back. The weapon couldn't be allowed to fall into the wrong hands, not even into theirs. As they worked to disable it, Sloan had a profound realization. Humanity was not just capable of creating and innovating in the present. They had the power to reshape the future itself, to build not just for themselves, but for every species that had been oppressed by the stagnation of millennia. The weapon, in its twisted potential, was just another tool. It was another thing that could be used to spark change, to create a future unlike any the galaxy had ever known. With a final, desperate push, they succeeded in destabilizing the crystal, reversing its energy output. It exploded in a flash of light that echoed across the galaxy. But it wasn't a destruction. They had redirected the weapon's power, turning its energy back upon the systems that had built it. Instead of reverting the galaxy to its past, it accelerated its progress. Entire planetary systems, previously locked in cycles of stagnation, were suddenly thrust forward. New technologies, new opportunities, new industries sprang into being in the wake of the weapon's disruption. As the dust settled and the revolutionaries took stock of the galaxy, the battle was over. The ruling powers were shattered. The weapon, which had once been a symbol of their power, had now become a symbol of the inevitable change that humanity had set in motion. The galaxy, for the first time in millennia, was no longer frozen in time. Humanity had created not just a new future for themselves, but had ignited the potential of every other species in the galaxy. It was a new era, an era of endless creation, where stagnation was no longer an option. Now, every species, every mind, had the freedom to invent, to innovate, to reach for what had once seemed impossible. The revolution had begun. And with humanity leading the charge, the galaxy was alive with possibility. In the aftermath of the explosion, the galaxy was left in a state of flux. The old powers were in disarray, their centuries-old empires shattered, their control over the vast, sprawling sectors of space broken. The rebellion was no longer just a fight for survival, it had become a fight for the future. A future that, for the first time in a long time, was uncertain. But one thing was clear: humanity had broken the shackles of stagnation, and in doing so, had become the vanguard of a new age. The leaders of the revolution, Marcus Sloan, his team of scientists and engineers, and the coalition of rebels now faced the monumental task of rebuilding the galaxy. But they had no illusions. The galaxy was not an empty canvas awaiting a masterpiece. It was a living, breathing expanse, home to millions of species, each with their own ambitions, fears, and desires. The work ahead would not be easy, and not all species would embrace the change that humanity had sparked. It was here, in the uncertain aftermath, that the real struggle began. The leaders of the revolution knew that true change would require more than just the fall of the old empires. It would require the hard work of rebuilding trust, forging new alliances, and creating a system where innovation could thrive across the galaxy, not just within humanity's borders. The old ways of thinking were deeply ingrained in many species. After centuries of dominance, it would take more than technology to convince them to embrace the revolution. One of the first challenges came from within the rebellion itself. While humanity had brought the spark of innovation to the galaxy, many of their newfound allies, the various species who had rallied to their cause, were still trying to understand what this revolution truly meant. The rebellion was a powerful force, but it was also a fragmented one. Many of the species who had joined the cause did so out of desperation, seeking liberation from their oppressive rulers. Some of these species had only just begun to grasp the potential of innovation, while others still clung to ancient traditions that would be difficult to reconcile with the new world being built. Marcus Sloan, the de facto leader of the revolution, quickly recognized the scale of the challenge before them. He called for an intergalactic summit, an unprecedented gathering of species and representatives from across the galaxy to discuss the future. The goal was not just to solidify the victory of the revolution, but to find a way to ensure that the progress humanity had sparked would not be crushed by the weight of old ideas and conflicts. The summit took place on Elysium Station, a massive space station that had once been a symbol of the old empire's control. Now, it was neutral ground, a place where species from every corner of the galaxy could come together and begin the difficult task of rebuilding. It was a symbolic gesture, a declaration that no one species would dominate the others in the new order. Humanity's role, however, was clear. They had sparked the fire of innovation, and now they would help guide the galaxy into this new age. But even as the summit convened, the cracks in the revolution began to show. Some species, particularly those that had long been oppressed, sought to establish their own dominance. They wanted more than just freedom from the old empires, they wanted power in this new world. Others, who had been content under the old regime, resented the idea of change. They feared that the innovations brought by humanity would disrupt the established order they had grown comfortable with. And still, there were those who feared the very nature of the revolution, that it would bring chaos, instability, and risk. The tension boiled over into the first real conflict of the post-revolutionary era. A faction of alien leaders, led by a charismatic but brutal figure named Admiral Zeril, launched a campaign to seize control of key systems in the Outer Rim. They claimed that the new order was weak, that humanity's ideals of openness and innovation would only lead to chaos and suffering. Their argument was simple: power should not be given away freely, it should be seized, held, and protected. They were a reminder that even in the wake of revolution, the hunger for control and dominance would not easily be extinguished. Humanity, however, had something no other species had: the experience of struggle, of survival against overwhelming odds. They knew how to fight not just with weapons, but with ideas. Sloan and his team, with the support of the revolution's more progressive factions, quickly mobilized their forces. But this wasn't a war of armies and fleets, it was a war of minds. In the days that followed, the human-led coalition launched a series of campaigns not just against Admiral Zeral's forces, but against the very ideology that underpinned his rebellion. They created new propaganda, new messages that spoke not just of technological superiority, but of the shared vision of a new galaxy. They reached out to the people on the planets Zeral sought to control, telling them not that they were being oppressed by their leaders, but that they were being given the chance to build something better. Humanity's message was clear: innovation wasn't just for the few, it was for everyone. And if they could create the future, they could create their own destiny. It wasn't easy. Zeral's forces were formidable, and their tactics ruthless. They understood the value of control, and they were willing to go to any lengths to preserve it. For every victory the revolutionaries won on the battlefield, Zeral's faction seemed to retaliate with greater force. Yet, despite this, the people began to turn. Slowly, the tide began to shift. The ideas humanity had spread of freedom, of progress, of the potential of every species to create began to take root. One of the key turning points came when a group of young engineers from the inner core of Zeral's forces defected. They had been trained in the old ways, taught that security and stability were the keys to survival. But after witnessing the miracles of innovation that humanity had brought to the galaxy — clean energy, faster than light travel, medical breakthroughs — they realized that there was a better way. They saw that the old order was nothing more than a fad, built on the exploitation of resources and the suppression of potential. When they defected, they brought with them not just information, but the keys to some of Zeral's most guarded technology. These engineers turned the tide of the war, enabling the revolutionaries to strike back with devastating precision. But the true victory came not in the battles fought, but in the shift in mentality. By the time the war with Admiral Zeral ended, his forces scattered and his ambitions shattered. The message had been sent. The revolution was no longer just a movement. It was a way of life. The galaxy had been forever changed by humanity's invention, and no matter how hard the old forces tried to hold on to power, they could not extinguish the spark that had been lit. Humanity's ideas, born in the fires of their rebellion, had spread across the galaxy, lighting up the darkest corners of the cosmos with the potential of a better future. As the years passed, humanity's role in the galaxy continued to evolve. They were no longer viewed as rebels or outsiders, they were the architects of a new age. The leaders of the former empires, those who had once clung to power and resisted change, had been forced to accept the new reality. Innovation, progress, and freedom were the cornerstones of the galaxy's new order. The old systems of control, of suppression, of stagnation had been torn down. In their place, a new structure arose, one based on collaboration, on the sharing of ideas, and on the belief that no one species was inherently superior to another. Humanity had done what no other species had thought possible. They had sparked a revolution not just in the political sense, but in the very way the galaxy understood itself. The stagnation that had once gripped the galaxy was gone, replaced by an era of boundless possibility. The future was no longer something to fear, it was something to create. And for the first time in the galaxy's long history, the universe was alive with potential, the stars shining brighter than ever before. Humanity had not just won a battle. They had won the future. And it was just beginning. The victory over Admiral Zeral and the other remnants of the old empire marked the beginning of an era, but it was only the beginning of a far greater challenge. With the old systems of power fractured and the galaxy now in the hands of diverse factions, some former rebels, some still uncertain about the new order, of fragile peace settled over the universe. The revolution had succeeded, but humanity's true test was only just beginning. In the years following Zeral's defeat, the galaxy's myriad species found themselves grappling with the aftermath of change. For the first time in millennia, there was no overarching power to keep the peace. No single empire dictated the flow of information, trade, or cultural exchange. Instead, humanity's revolutionary ideas about innovation, freedom, and cooperation had inspired an entirely new way of thinking. But as the dust settled, it became clear that the galaxy was still deeply divided, with various factions vying for control, influence, and resources. The new order, while promising, was still young and fragile. Marcus Sloan, now a revered leader of the revolution, understood this better than anyone. He knew that the galaxy's newfound freedom would not be enough to ensure long-term stability. While technology had freed many species from the shackles of oppression, it was humanity's ability to bring people together, to bridge ideological divides, that would determine whether the revolution's ideals could truly take root. Sloan's task was clear: to unite the disparate factions, to ensure that the galaxy did not fall back into the same patterns of conflict and stagnation that had plagued it for centuries. But the path to unity was fraught with obstacles. Not all species embraced the new order with open arms. While many had benefited from the innovations brought by humanity, others were still wary of the future. Some felt that humanity's technological advances were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Others feared that they were losing their cultural identity in the rush to embrace innovation. Still, others simply did not trust humanity's intentions. The idea of a galactic alliance was a tantalizing one, but it seemed to many like an impossible dream. To address these concerns, Sloan embarked on a series of diplomatic missions, visiting planet after planet, meeting with leaders and thinkers from every corner of the galaxy. His goal was not just to promote humanity's vision of the future, but to listen to understand the fears and desires of the species who had been swept up in the revolution. In every conversation, Sloan emphasized the core tenets of the revolution: cooperation, mutual respect, and the belief that every species had the right to shape its own future. At the same time, the human-led coalition worked tirelessly to continue the spread of innovation. New cities were built, powered by humanity's limitless energy technology. Hospitals and medical centers, once the domain of the elite, were now accessible to all. Schools and universities opened their doors, offering education to species who had once been denied it. The hope was that these tangible improvements would provide the foundation for a lasting peace. But as much as humanity's inventions had transformed the galaxy, they were not enough to silence the deep-seated fears that still lingered among many. One such fear emerged in the form of the Drellians, a once powerful race whose empire had collapsed in the wake of the revolution. The Drellians were a technologically advanced species, but their long history of military dominance had left them deeply distrustful of others. They had relied on strength and control to maintain their position in the galaxy, and the sudden loss of their empire left them vulnerable. For years, the Drellians had watched humanity's rise with a mixture of admiration and suspicion, uncertain whether humanity's technological prowess was a force for good or a threat to their own survival. When the Drellian Council, composed of the most influential leaders of their fractured society, issued an ultimatum demanding that humanity cease its spread of technology to other species or face consequences, Sloan knew that the fragile peace was at risk. The Drellians were not alone in their concerns. Other species, particularly those whose empires had fallen to humanity's revolution, had begun to whisper among themselves. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and some were not sure they liked where it was heading. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival, it was fighting for a shared future. The revolution was about creating a galaxy where innovation, freedom, and cooperation could thrive, free from fear and distrust. The stakes had never been higher. Sloan called an emergency council of revolutionaries, gathering representatives from every species that embraced the ideals of the movement. The Drellian ultimatum was the top concern, but there were others who had gained power in the revolution and sought to impose their own order. For every species supporting humanity's vision, another clung to old ways, trying to maintain their control. As the council met on Elysium Station, the tension was palpable. Everyone knew the significance of this moment. If they failed to agree, the revolution's hard-won gains would unravel, and the galaxy would fall back into chaos. The Drillians, represented by their most powerful leader, High Chancellor Vreth, were adamant in their demands. "We will not allow humanity to spread its unchecked influence across the galaxy," Vreth declared, his voice booming across the chamber. "Your technology is a tool of domination. We will not be controlled by your innovations, your systems, your machines. We will defend our right to determine our own future, and if you continue to force your way upon us, we will fight to preserve it." Sloan remained calm. "We don't seek control," he said. "Our goal is a galaxy where every species can grow and innovate. Our technologies are tools, not weapons. No species can stand alone. We must work together for the galaxy's survival." Tension filled the room. Some agreed, but others, like the Drillians, were concerned. After hours of debate, a resolution was proposed, a galactic council to oversee technology and ensure it benefited all species. It would serve as a forum for negotiation and conflict resolution. The Drillians, initially resistant, agreed to join, but only if a neutral body managed technology sharing to prevent any unfair advantage. The resolution passed, uniting the galaxy in a fragile but hopeful peace, built on cooperation and innovation rather than military power. The revolution had changed the galaxy, but the real work began, creating a future where every species could contribute to progress. The old ways of conquest and stagnation had been replaced, and the galaxy buzzed with possibility. Humanity had sparked not just a revolution, but a new beginning. As the council took its first steps, the stars burned brighter than ever, each one a symbol of the potential ahead. The revolution had just begun.